In the dead of a Wyoming winter, where the wind howls through the pines like the ghosts of the fallen, a former Marine named Jack Turner lives in silence. His only companion, a rescue shepherd named Ranger, the last living piece of a life lost to fire. But tonight, as the storm rises and Ranger barks into the darkness, Jack doesn't know that this sound, this desperate cry through the blizzard, will pull him back into the flames of his past and into a battle between truth, betrayal, and the kind of loyalty only a dog can give. If you find this story meaningful, please subscribe to the channel and give us a heart to motivate us to make more touching videos. Let's continue the story together. The wind over Wolf Hollow screamed like a living thing, tearing across the ridges and rattling the windows of the lonely cabin. Snow swept down in thick, endless sheets, devouring every trace of the trail below. Inside, Jack Turner, a 42-year-old Marine veteran, sat by the fading fire. His frame was lean, built from years of field labor and cold. His brown hair was streaked with grey at the temples, and a short, uneven beard shadowed the strong line of his jaw. There was a heaviness in his eyes, a quiet that came from carrying too many ghosts. When the wood cracked in the flames, Jack didn't flinch, only reached down to rest his hand on the thick fur of his dog. Ranger, a 4-year-old German shepherd with a silver-grey coat, stirred beside him. The dog's right ear was slightly torn, a scar from a rescue mission that went wrong long before the two met. He had the calm vigilance of a soldier and the loyalty of one who had seen loss. Jack often talked to him as if to another Marine. Outside, the storm thickened, yet Ranger's ears suddenly perked, his body tensing. He stood, nose raised toward the window, tail stiff. Then came the first sound, faint, desperate, an echo of metal scraping against rock. Jack's instinct returned in an instant. He reached for his coat and rifle. The blizzard swallowed him whole as he stepped out, Ranger leading ahead like a grey ghost in the snow. The air cut through his lungs. The world was white and silent, but for the storm. Then, a flicker of orange far below the slope. A burning vehicle. Jack's boots crunched through the drifts as he descended. Near the wreck, the smell of gasoline and scorched rubber mixed with blood. Inside the half-melted SUV sat a young woman in a torn bridal gown. Her lips were blue, her eyes glassy but alive. "Hey!" Jack shouted, pulling open the mangled door. She blinked, dazed. Her name, he would soon learn, was Claire Dawson, mid-20s, pale skin turned grey from cold, long blonde hair tangled with soot. Her wedding dress clung to her like ice. There was beauty in her face, but more striking was the terror in her eyes, wide and searching. "He left me," she whispered through chattering teeth. "He left me here to die." Jack didn't ask who. He simply lifted her from the seat, her body light, almost fragile in his arms. As he turned, Ranger growled, nose under the driver's seat. "What is it, boy?" Jack murmured. Then he saw it, the dull metallic gleam of a grenade, its pin half pulled. Ranger lunged, jaws clamping on the metal, hurling it into the snow just as Jack dove behind the wreck with Claire in his arms. The explosion tore through the night, a bloom of fire against the white storm. Heat slammed against Jack's back. He shielded Claire with his body, feeling Ranger's bark cut through the roar. When silence finally fell, the snow came again, hissing as it met the cooling flames. Jack rose, heart pounding, his breath a white ghost in the dark. Someone had wanted her gone, not lost, but erased. As Ranger limped back toward him, singed fur steaming, Jack looked out into the storm. The blizzard had swallowed the road, the tracks, everything. Only the burning wreck remained, a dying beacon in a world of ice. He held Claire tighter, her pulse weak against his chest. "We're not dying here," he said through clenched teeth. Ranger pressed close, eyes burning with the same determination. Together, they turned toward the invisible trail back to the cabin, leaving behind the fire that would draw others before dawn, others who would kill to bury the truth. Snow drifted like ash across the ridges of Wolf Hollow as Jack pushed open the heavy cabin door. The wind howled behind him, slamming it shut as he carried Claire inside. She was limp in his arms, her bridal gown stiff with frost. Ranger padded close, his silver-grey fur streaked with soot from the explosion. Jack set the woman on the couch beside the hearth and stripped off his gloves. The room was small but solid, a single stone fireplace, rough-hewn beams, a table scarred by years of solitude. He moved with the precision of a man trained to survive anywhere, checking the fire, locking the shutters, refilling the lantern. Then he crouched beside Claire. Her lips trembled, her breath shallow. He pulled an old wool blanket around her shoulders and said quietly, "You're safe now. For tonight." She stirred, eyes fluttering open. The firelight revealed the soft, frightened lines of her face. Claire Dawson looked younger here, without the smoke and chaos. She was the kind of woman who seemed out of place in wilderness. Delicate, educated, someone who'd grown up in polished halls, not mountains. Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Jack didn't answer right away. He poured coffee from the iron pot, handed her the mug. Because someone had to. When she reached for it, her hands shook so badly that he steadied them with his own. His touch startled her. His calloused palms were warm, firm, grounding. Ranger sat nearby, watching every motion, eyes alert. The dog had stopped trembling, but his ears twitched toward the window. Something outside unsettled him. Jack rose to his full height, tall and broad-shouldered, his movements deliberate. The fire threw hard shadows across his face, outlining the sharp cheekbones, the silver in his beard. He'd been a man who once belonged to the world, until it burned him alive. Now, each sound from the storm drew his gaze like a trigger pull. He stirred the soup on the stove, but his mind wasn't in the room. He was thinking about Hannah, her laughter, the scent of pine smoke in her hair the night before she died. He blinked once, hard. Ranger's low growl snapped him back. The shepherd was standing, muscles tense, staring at the frosted window panes. Jack crossed the room quietly, rifle in hand. "Easy," he whispered to the dog. He leaned close to the glass and froze. There were smudges outside, faint streaks of oil in the snow, and beneath them, the unmistakable scent of gasoline. He felt it before he saw it, the slow bloom of orange under the window. "Down!" he shouted. Ranger moved faster than any command. The dog lunged toward the glowing shape, jaws closing around a burning bottle. In a blur, he hurled it through the open door just as it erupted. The explosion ripped through the porch, a burst of flame and smoke that blew Jack backward. The roof shuddered, snow and fire raining together like sparks from heaven. Jack coughed through the smoke, dragging Claire toward the door. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the inferno outside. "They found me," she gasped, voice breaking. "I took something from them, from Wolf Corp. They'll kill anyone who knows." Jack didn't ask what. There would be time later. He pulled her close, shielding her with his coat as Ranger pressed against his leg, singed fur steaming in the cold. The flames devoured the porch, their heat warping the glass of the only home he'd trusted. Jack glanced down at Ranger. In the dog's eyes, the fire danced, a reflection of a memory both of them shared. The night the flames took Hannah. The howl that tore from Ranger's throat was not fear. It was recognition. Morning came slow over Wolf Hollow, the blizzard dying into a grey hush. Steam rose from the half-frozen lake below, like breath from a sleeping beast. Jack guided Claire along the ridge, one arm steadying her as Ranger trotted ahead, nose low, leading the way. The trail wound toward a half-collapsed structure on the hill, the old Wolf Hollow fire station, long abandoned since the Great Blaze 6 years earlier. Its brick walls were cracked, the red paint stripped by weather, but the steel door still bore a faded emblem of crossed axes. Inside, the air smelled of rust and memory. Ranger walked in circles, tail low, sniffing every corner, as if recalling a ghost. Jack had brought him here once for rescue drills. It was where the dog had learned to run through smoke without fear. Now, both man and animal stepped back into the ruins of their past. Jack helped Claire to a cot, draped with old blankets. Her skin was pale under the flickering lantern light, but her eyes carried that same wary intelligence. She watched him as he rummaged through a rusted locker and pulled out a can of water. "Drink slowly," he said. "We'll stay here until the storm clears." His voice had softened, though the lines around his mouth betrayed caution. Claire hesitated, then spoke, her tone fragile but steady. "They won't stop, not after what I took." She reached into the inner fold of her torn dress and pulled out a black USB drive, scratched and burned at the edges. Ranger tilted his head as if he sensed the weight of what she held. Jack's brow furrowed. "What's on it?" She didn't answer, just plugged it into the old field laptop Jack kept for navigation. The screen flickered, revealing a series of encrypted files labeled Wolf Project Yours Ember Light Test 4B. Jack clicked the video. The footage opened with the sound of rotors, then chaos. A team of firefighters surrounded by a forest engulfed in orange. He leaned closer and froze. The camera panned across faces hidden behind masks, and there, in the blur of smoke, he saw her. Hannah Turner, his wife. She was shouting commands, guiding her crew into the inferno before the feed cut out in static. Jack's throat closed. He slammed the laptop shut, breathing raggedly. "Where did you get this?" he demanded. Claire's eyes glistened. "It wasn't supposed to be seen. My father, General Dawson, he signed the order to ignite the test field. They told the public it was an accident. It wasn't." Jack stepped back, the name striking him like a bullet. "Dawson?" His voice dropped, cold as the stone floor. Claire nodded. "He's Wolf Corp's military liaison. I tried to expose them. They came after me instead." Outside, Ranger growled low. The sound of mechanical wings sliced through the silence. Jack's head snapped toward the shattered window. Through the thinning fog, a red beam swept across the lake. The infrared searchlight of a drone. Ranger barked once, sharp. "Warning!" Jack lunged to douse the lantern, plunging the room into darkness. The hum of rotors grew louder, circling overhead. Claire clutched the blanket around her shoulders, trembling. Jack knelt beside Ranger, whispering, "Quiet, boy." The dog pressed his body flat to the floor, ears flicking as the beam passed over the glass, cutting through the rising mist like the eye of judgment. In that crimson light, guilt and grief intertwined. Two survivors trapped between what they lost and what they still feared to face. The wind had less teeth, but the cold was a different kind of animal, as Ethan Cole's truck carved a black line through the white toward the old fire station. He stepped out with the careful gait of a man who had learned to move quietly around other men's pain. Ethan was in his late 40s, square-jawed, salt and pepper stubble along his chin, eyes the tired steel of someone who had worn a badge long enough to know how to bend the truth for survival. Once a volunteer firefighter, and years ago a friend in Jack's unit, Ethan now wore the county sheriff's coat that hung awkwardly on his broad shoulders. The smile he kept fracturing into was tired and small. He lifted gloved hand in greeting, voice rough with cold and something else, reluctant contrition. "Jack." Jack's face, lit by the lantern, was hard. Ranger's hackles rose long before Ethan reached the door. The dog stood like a sentinel, chest low, muzzle foaming slightly where the singe had burned his fur. His eyes were bright coals of suspicion. Jack hesitated, the old military code warring with survival instincts and the memory of shared duty. He let Ethan in. Ethan's manner inside was too careful. Fingers that had once steadied a rifle now rubbed the bridge of his nose as if to wipe away guilt. He carried himself like a man who had been given impossible choices. Ethan's shoulders sagged because of it, and because of the hollow look about his mouth that came from long nights in fluorescent hospital rooms beside a boy's bed. After a few awkward moments, he offered help, spare shelter, transport once the storm eased. But there was a tremor in his hand when he set a thermos down. Claire watched him with pinched eyes that were trying on trust like a cold coat. The pause was a breath too long. Ethan's face went hard then, and before any explanation could be traded, he drew a sidearm with the slow, precise movement of a man who has done worse and learned to hide the memory. The action was a betrayal that cut the room's air like a blade. Ranger snapped with the speed of instinct honed in smoke-filled drills. The dog threw himself between Jack and the barrel of the gun, a living shield. The first shot hit the air where his shoulder had been. The second found flesh. Ranger yelped, a raw, human sound, and collapsed. Blood darkened the dog's flank as he tried to rise, eyes squeezed shut against shock. He looked smaller and somehow enormous all at once. Ethan did not stay to argue. He had made the calculation of a desperate man and fled, boots disappearing into the swirling snow. In his rush, he left behind a small, crackling radio that blinked a coded light. A low-power transmitter, a beacon for the Wolf Corps search teams that would triangulate the signal and close the net. Claire fell to her knees, hands caked in the snow and soot, and through tears confessed what she could bear. Wolf Corp controlled the access to an experimental treatment for Ethan's son, life-saving, expensive, and only available if the sheriff turned a blind eye or delivered a body. Ethan had been forced into complicity with promises the company never intended to keep, or threats they meant to enforce. The shrinkage in his face was not hardness, but a bruise made of fear. Jack's breath fogged in the lantern light as he watched Ranger's ribcage rise and fall in shallow, urgent pulls. Rage filled him like ice water, and he found voice with a clarity that made every bird in the trees seem to stop. If they want to bury the truth, we'll dig it up from under their feet. He wrapped his coat around Ranger, feeling the tremor of the dog's frame under his hands, and the three of them, man, injured dog, frightened woman, settled into a silence that tasted like a promise and a threat at once. By dusk, the storm had thinned into a dim drizzle of snowflakes that clung to the pines like ash. Jack moved with quiet urgency, carrying a folded, weather-stained map marked with Hannah's handwriting, black ink smudged by water and time. Each curve of her pen was a ghost he could still feel under his fingertips. Claire followed a few steps behind, wrapped in an oversized parka Jack had found in a supply crate. Her face, framed by frost and fear, had hardened into resolve. The pale, frightened bride was gone. Beside them limped Ranger, his left flank bound with Jack's torn undershirt. The fur around the wound matted, but his spirit unbroken. He moved slower now, yet his eyes burned with focus. The disciplined fire of a creature who understood pain, but not surrender. Their path wound toward the dark mouth of the Wolf Hollow mine, sealed years ago after an accident. To Jack, that word had started to sound like a prayer for the guilty. The mine's gate hung crooked on its hinges, half buried under snow. Inside, the air was damp and tasted of copper. Claire lit a flare, the orange glow cutting through layers of darkness, revealing rusted carts, broken helmets, and warning signs bleached by time. "This was where they tested it," she said, voice low. "The plasma reactor. It was supposed to power bases off-grid, but it burned everything instead." Jack ran his hand along the wall, feeling the grooves cut deep into the stone. "And Hannah was down here?" His voice cracked on her name. Claire nodded. "She led the containment team. Wolf Corp blamed her crew when the fire spread. They made her the villain to hide what they'd done." The flare hissed. For a moment, it cast their shadows long across the tunnel wall, twisting together like memories that refused to die. Further in, a metallic hum began to pulse. Faint at first, then steady. Ranger's ears flicked up. He trotted forward, ignoring the pain in his side. The tunnel widened into a chamber where a row of blinking lights still glowed beneath a thick layer of dust. Claire crouched beside a corroded console, brushing off grime. "It's still online," she whispered. Jack leaned over her shoulder, staring at the screen's header. "Operation Emberlight, classified." She inserted the USB and the machine whirred to life, filling the cavern with the echo of spinning drives. Data scrolled across the monitor. Maps, personnel files, a list of chemical formulas. "This is it," Claire said. "The proof." Her hands shook as she copied the data. Then came the echo of boots. A shadow moved at the tunnel mouth. Ethan Cole stepped into the flare light, snow still melting from his coat, pistol in hand. His face looked older than before, lined by guilt and exhaustion. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "They're coming. They tracked the radio I left behind." Jack raised his rifle, voice low. "Then why follow them back?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Because I can't undo what I did, but I can choose how it ends." His voice trembled between confession and command. The tension cracked like ice underfoot when Ranger growled, and a single drop of fuel from a ruptured canister hit the flare. Fire bloomed across the floor. Ethan lunged to cover it, but Ranger was faster. The dog charged, knocking Ethan aside. The pistol went off, ricocheting into the generator. Sparks erupted, flame raced up the walls, and the chamber roared alive with light. Jack grabbed Claire, shouting, "Move!" Behind them, the mine lit like a furnace as the explosion chased their shadows through the tunnel, swallowing the proof, the guilt, and every secret Wolfcorp tried to bury. The world had turned into fire. The tunnel behind them collapsed in a storm of sparks, and the roar of the explosion chased them like an angry god. Jack's lungs burned with smoke as he dragged Claire through the rising heat. Her parka was torn, her face streaked with soot. Every breath came out as a cry. Ranger stumbled beside them, fur charred along his back, limping but unyielding. The dog's breaths were sharp, wet with pain, yet his eyes stayed on Jack, as if refusing to fall until his duty was done. They reached the blast door at the end of the corridor, a massive slab of steel warped by heat. Jack shoved the lever, but it wouldn't move. He tried again, both hands white with effort, the veins on his neck rising. The mechanism was fused. Smoke filled the chamber. The light turned orange and then red. Claire clutched his arm. "Jack, stop!" He ignored her. "We're not dying down here." Ranger staggered forward, sniffing the metal frame. Beneath the deafening rumble, there was a faint hiss, compressed gas leaking from a cracked pipe near the wall. The dog lowered his head, teeth scraping against the latch. "Ranger, no!" Jack shouted, but it was too late. The shepherd clamped down on the handle, twisting, pulling, muscles straining until the steel shrieked. The lock snapped open with a clang. The door gave way, groaning like a wounded beast. A wave of cold air rushed in, carrying rain and ash. Claire gasped and stumbled into the downpour beyond. Jack turned back for Ranger, who was lying still beside the doorway, chest rising unevenly. "Come on, buddy," Jack whispered, scooping the dog into his arms. The air outside was chaos. Black smoke, rain, and the taste of iron. Behind them, Ethan's voice rose faintly through the flames. He stood at the far end of the corridor, blood soaking through his sleeve, his face pale beneath the soot. "Go, Jack," he shouted. "You still have something worth saving." Jack took a step forward, but Ethan shook his head. The man's grey eyes, once cold, had softened into peace. "You always had the better dog," he said, a small, sad smile tugging at his burned lips. "Guess you were the better man too." He turned away before Jack could answer. A metal beam above him gave way. In an instant, the tunnel collapsed, swallowing Ethan in a cascade of fire and debris. Jack carried Ranger into the rain, Claire beside him, both slipping on the wet slope of mud. The mountain groaned as the mine imploded. A wall of flame erupted from the entrance, flaring against the storm. Thunder cracked overhead, and the sky opened wide, a deluge pouring down in blinding sheets. Steam hissed as fire met water. Claire fell to her knees, staring at the inferno dying under the rain. Jack crouched beside her, lowering Ranger gently to the ground. The dog's eyes fluttered open once, catching the glimmer of light through the rain. Jack touched his head, voice trembling. "Rest, soldier. You did it." The rain fell harder, washing soot and blood into the soil. Wolf Hollow burned itself out, leaving only smoke and silence. And somewhere in that fading glow, a single spark still burned, the last light, born of loyalty and love. 2 months passed before Wolf Hollow breathed again. The valley had turned green where fire once reigned, the rain having coaxed wildflowers from the scorched earth. Jack Turner stood outside the rebuilt cabin, axe in hand, splitting wood by habit more than need. His beard had grown thick and grey, the lines on his face deeper, carved by loss and wind. He moved slower now, but there was peace in the rhythm. Each swing a quiet prayer for those who didn't return. His left shoulder still ached from the cave-in, yet he refused to rest. Behind him, smoke rose gently from the chimney, carrying the scent of coffee and pine. Life, he thought, had a strange way of starting again, even when you swore it couldn't. Claire Dawson had kept her promise. In the city, she had stood before journalists, her once shaken voice now clear and strong. Wolf Corp had fallen within a week. Its executives arrested, its name erased from every contract it had corrupted. She wore plain clothes now, a wool coat the colour of dawn, her blonde hair tied back. When she appeared on the television that Jack rarely turned on, she didn't mention her father. She simply said, "No truth deserves to burn." In her hand, she held the dog tag of a soldier, Ethan Cole, posthumously honoured for exposing the network that had blackmailed him. Jack had watched in silence, a half-smile tugging his mouth. He'd known Ethan's face too long to mistake cowardice for weakness. The man had paid his debt. The mountains had grown quiet since the mine collapse. Jack had buried the past beneath work, fixing fences, carving wood, tending the small memorial he'd built beside the lake. A rough stone marked the spot, engraved with 3 names, Hannah, Ethan, and a space left blank, for one more he wasn't ready to carve. At night, he sometimes thought he heard a bark in the wind, the kind that lived between dream and memory. He told himself it was imagination, but part of him listened all the same. Rain came often that spring, soft and constant, washing the soot from the trees and leaving behind a silver haze. Then one morning, just as dawn began to bleed through the clouds, Jack heard it again. Faint, hoarse, real. A bark. He froze, heart pounding. Outside, through the mist, a shape moved across the slope, limping, soaked, alive. Ranger. The shepherd's fur was scorched black along one side, his right eye clouded white with blindness. He was thinner, older somehow, but unmistakably himself. Around his neck hung a charred rescue tag, Hannah's old ID tag, the one Jack had lost years ago in the fire. The dog staggered, stumbled once, then pressed his muzzle against Jack's knee. For a heartbeat, man and dog just stood there, breathing the same cold air. Then Jack dropped to his knees, hands trembling as they found the warm fur beneath the scars. "You came home," he whispered. "You stubborn, beautiful soldier. You came home." The rain began again, mingling with his tears. Ranger rested his head against Jack's chest, eyes closing as if the weight of survival had finally lifted. Jack looked to the horizon, where the first light of morning pierced the clouds, golden and soft, against the ash-streaked hills. "You're the reason I still believe," he murmured, "that God hasn't left us yet." The wind rose, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth. On the ridge above the cabin, Ranger lay later that day, his fur catching the sunlight, the scars along his back gleaming like silver threads. The valley below shimmered with new life, and as the light grew brighter, Wolf Hollow, once a place of fire and loss, became a place of grace. Sometimes God doesn't send angels in white robes. Sometimes he sends them with fur, scars and eyes that never stop believing in you. Ranger's return wasn't just a miracle. It was a reminder that faith still flickers in the smallest corners of our lives. When you feel alone, when the world burns down around you, remember, love has a way of finding the path home. And perhaps that's how God works. Quietly, through the loyal hearts we least expect. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that miracles still happen. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what you believe loyalty means. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and may God bless you, and every loyal soul who's ever stood by your side.